All right, good afternoon, everybody. I've been informed that we're ready technically and otherwise to get started, so I'll hereby call this meeting of the Government Administration and Elections Committee to order. First item on our agenda, I just took care of, which is convening. Next will be remarks by the chairs. Ordinarily, we do not say much on this point, but I'm going to give a brief background to this kind of unorthodox meeting to anyone who is watching. We are meeting today based on authority designated to us by Connecticut General Statutes Section 2-30A, subsection A, which says that at such time as a proposed constitutional amendment and its concomitant ballot question are approved by the General Assembly for presentation to the electors of the state for their consideration at a general election, the Office of Legislative Research shall prepare a concise explanatory text as to the content and purpose of the proposed constitutional amendment, subject to the approval of the Joint Standing Committee of the General Assembly, having cognizance of constitutional amendments. Upon such approval, the Secretary of the State shall cause such proposed amendment and such explanatory text to be printed and transmitted to the town clerk and to the registrars of voters in each town in the state in sufficient supply for public distribution. So this statutory subsection is the background and the reason why we're here today, along with the passage in 2 non-consecutive legislative sessions by the General Assembly of Resolution Act number 23-1, which is a resolution which would approve a state constitutional amendment to allow no excuse absentee voting or absentee voting for every person who is eligible to vote by law and would like to vote by that method. So that is a little of the statutory background. As you heard from the statutory language, our responsibility and our charge today under law is to approve or disapprove of the explanatory text, which is set before us by the Office of Legislative Research, and which we'll be considering. Based on the statutory text and past precedent of this committee, we do not have the ability to amend that text. We have only the ability to approve it or disapprove it. And as a result, although we'd ordinarily potentially consider amendments, it is not in order for us to do so today. So I'm sure we'll be discussing the statutory text, or excuse me, the explanatory text itself. But I wanted to give that background for anyone who is watching today and wonders why we're here, what we're doing, and why we're doing it the way we're doing it. All right, on that note, are there any remarks from my co-chair, Senator Flexer? None from her. And from the rankings, Senator Sampson?
I was figuring, Mr. Chairman, that I would wait until we got into the business. I don't have any opening remarks.
Okay. The rankings do not have any opening remarks. And as a result, we will move on to Roman numeral 3 of our agenda, consideration of the explanatory text for the November ballot question. By way of introduction, as I said before, the November ballot question under consideration today is based on Resolution Act number 23-1, resolution approving a state constitutional amendment to allow no excuse absentee voting. As I previously indicated, under Section 2-30A of the General Statutes, the Office of Legislative Research has composed and sent the committee a explanatory text, and we will now consider it. Because it is relatively short, I will just simply read it into the record, I think, and it is the following. Under the current state constitution, qualified voters may cast an absentee vote only if they are unable to vote in person at their polling place on election day due to 1, absence from their city or town, 2, sickness or physical disability, or 3, their religious beliefs prohibiting secular activity on that day. If this amendment is approved, the state constitution would no longer limit the reasons why absentee voting may be used. Therefore, it would expand the state legislature's authority to pass laws regarding voting by qualified voters who will not appear at their polling place on election day. And I will, at this point, entertain a motion to approve this explanatory text.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second, Moore and Bello.
Moved by my co-chair, Senator Flexer, seconded by the vice chair, Representative Moore and Bello. Is there further discussion on this measure? Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you folks hear me okay? Forgive me, they updated our Zoom. I can't even find the spot to raise my hand digitally anymore. But so good afternoon. I want to start this conversation really by trying to truly understand exactly what the purpose of this meeting is. This is not the first such meeting I've participated in. And the last one was kind of confusing because I think that we went into it expecting to have our normal ability as lawmakers to discuss, engage, and amend the text before us. And as the good chairman mentioned in his opening remarks, it does not appear we have the ability to amend this document. And I'm just curious about that. Is there a statute that governs what our authority is in this meeting with regard to this language? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
To you, to the ranking member, Senator Sampson, the answer is yes. That statute is Connecticut General Statutes, Section 23-A, and in particular, subsection A of that statute. To you.
I appreciate that information. Can you tell me what it says?
Sure. So the title is Explanatory Text Concerning Proposed Constitutional Amendments, semicolon, preparation, approval, printing, distribution, posting at polls. Subsection A of that section says, at such time as a proposed constitutional amendment and its concomitant ballot question are approved by the General Assembly for presentation to the electors of the state for their consideration at a general election, the Office of Legislative Research shall prepare a concise explanatory text as to the content and purpose of the proposed constitutional amendment subject to the approval of the Joint Standing Committee of the General Assembly having cognizance of constitutional amendments. Upon such approval, the Secretary of the State shall cause such proposed amendment and such explanatory text to be printed and transmitted to the town clerk and to the registrars of voters in each town in the state in sufficient supply for public distribution. And there's a subsection B to that section, but it deals with the Secretary of the State's printing of the explanations and how and in what measure, et cetera, they must be printed. To you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that information. It just leads me to kind of another question, which is, would it be in our purview to offer an amendment to potentially change that statute simultaneous with a potential change to the explanatory text? Or would that somehow not be with our rules?
I can give you my opinion, and we can also check in with LCO if you'd like. I think the authority given to us by the statute is pretty clear on its face. We're given the authority only to confirm or reject the language that's been transmitted to us by OLR. If we were going to change the underlying statute, and just as a matter of state constitutional law, we would have to go through the normal legislative process. We'd have to be in session. We'd have to raise a bill. It would have to exit the committee. It would have to be voted on by the full General Assembly and then approved by the governor or approved over his veto. To you.
Yeah, the good chairman, I'm sure you know that we do many changes in statute without the committee process being involved. And I'm not suggesting that's a good idea or even something I want to get into today. But is it the fact that the question is the direct result of a resolution that has been adopted by both chambers, that is restricting our ability to make that amendment? And if so, how does that interact with the explanatory text, which was not part of that resolution?
I think the answer to your question is yes to you. The explanatory text, its drafting is triggered by the passage of the resolution through the required constitutional process. And this statutory section gives us the authority and the responsibility to review it as we're doing today and either confirm or reject that explanatory text. So we're limited by the state constitutional process for amending the state constitution, and then also the Connecticut statutes that designate how we can amend the procedures for a constitutional amendment being considered by the public on the ballot.
I appreciate that interpretation, Mr. Chairman. I've never actually agreed with it. I kind of old school in that I think that if there's no law that specifically denies us the ability to perform a certain act, then it's a lawful act. And you've used the term, reject or deny or something like that a couple of times. But I think what you read was that the committee's obligation is to approve the question. And that's a vague enough term for me to, read into it that we have the ability to approve a question. That would mean we also have the ability to modify it. And I guess that's where our dispute lies. I won't belabor it too much because, I know how these things go. We've been down this road before. I've attempted to offer amendments on the second go around of the resolution, and that was decided by the president or the lieutenant governor in the Senate, suggesting that somehow that is not appropriate because of the resolution, and made much the same argument that you did. So again, I won't go down that road. I just think it's unfortunate because I think we're in a situation where we want to get this right, and leaving the nonpartisan staff to the job of drafting something that is going to be used in the process of making a constitutional change in our state without the participation of lawmakers, other than an up or down vote, I think is difficult for me to accept. Is it your position, Mr. Chairman, that really the only option we have here is if I were to make a compelling enough argument to you that this needs to be changed, that we could vote down this explanatory text, and that might trigger OLR to have to go back to the drawing board? Is that the way you understand it?
To you, Senator Sampson, to the good senator, yes, that's my understanding. If we were to vote down the explanatory text, the draft explanatory text has been presented to us today, it would then go back to the Office of Legislative Research to redraft that text in accordance with any indications that we gave for how it should be redrafted. I'm assuming through debate, but there would be no official mechanism for us to direct them to do anything in particular with that text. We would be indicating informally through our debate how we believe the text should be changed in a manner that we would approve it. And then it would go back to OLR for them to redraft and resubmit to us, and then back to us for approval under the statute to you.
Thank you. And that's kind of what I expected to hear. So what would the timeline be on something like that? Do you think that it's already the 15th of August, right? And I know that there's a point at which ballots need to be printed and so forth. So is it possible that I'm not suggesting that we're going to get there today. I'm just curious to know that given that set of circumstances, there was a compelling argument made, and we found enough votes in this committee to reject the explanatory text before us. What does the timeline look like for OLR to reproduce that, and then for you to properly notice another meeting, et cetera?
To the good ranking member, my understanding, and we can get confirmation from LCO on this if possible, I believe that the deadline for approval of the explanatory text is August 30th for all the deadlines to be properly followed. So if the text were rejected today, it would need to be redrafted and we need to have another meeting before then.
Right. Yeah, that's unfortunate. That doesn't leave much of a timeline for a resolution, especially if it may take a couple of tries for us to get this right. And I'll just stress, for anyone watching that, we're talking about a very significant change to our Constitution. And certainly it's rightfully being left up to the voters of Connecticut to make the final decision. But the question and the explanatory text that is placed before the voters is critically important. And I think we all understand that the way these items are written can have a significant impact on whether or not this resolution passes or not. And I'll get into that in just a second. I guess I have one more question about the explanatory text, and that is for the edification of anyone listening. Where does this text go? Where will it be seen by voters? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
To you, to the good ranking member, it will be, I believe, displayed publicly. Actually, it says in subsection B of the same statutory section we've been discussing, says that the Secretary of the State shall print the explanations of proposed constitutional amendments as required by subsection A of this section on posters of a size to be determined by said secretary, and shall mail at least 3 such posters for every polling place within a town to the registrars of voters. Said registrar shall cause at least 3 such posters to be posted at each polling place at which electors shall be voting on such proposed constitutional amendments. Any posters received by the registrars in excess of the number required by the subsection to be so posted may be displayed by said registrars at their discretion, at locations which are frequented by the public. No expenditure of state funds shall be made to influence electors to vote for or against any such constitutional amendments. So that's how they will be displayed to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Between you and me, and of course anyone else that can hear the sound of my voice, I'm not really satisfied with that as the best possible way to convey to potential voters the impact of this question. I just feel like most people are going to be in line voting and inclined to cast their vote for their candidate for president, for example, which is going to be coming up this next election cycle, that this ballot question will appear. And there'll be so few people really aware ahead of time or interested in finding out the details that sadly, I think no matter what we put for the explanatory text, it's not likely to impact a great many decisions. And I think that's tremendously unfortunate. But what it does is it means that the question is all that more important, that we have a responsibility to get the question right so that voters truly understand the ramifications of their yay or nay vote on that question. And I guess I'll dive right into it, which is, I know that we're here to discuss the explanatory text, but I just want to point out that my concern really is that the explanatory text is the only thing that even gives the slightest indication of what's happening. The ballot question that is going to be offered, that was part of the resolution, it reads, shall the Constitution of the state be amended to permit the General Assembly to allow each voter to vote by absentee ballot? And when I read that, it implies the current law, because the current law already permits the General Assembly to allow each voter to vote by absentee ballot. And, we can discuss what the Constitution currently reads and what the current statute reads, but I think it's very clear that the General Assembly is making determinations based on the confines of the Constitution that voters can vote by absentee ballot. Now, they might be included or excluded for eligibility based on certain criteria, but for my purposes, I think the question should be a lot more clear. And I will just make a quick point, which is to say that back in 2014, a similar resolution was passed by the legislature for advancing no excuse absentee voting. And make no mistake, that's what we're talking about. The good chairman opened his remarks by saying we were here to discuss the question and explanatory text on no excuse absentee voting. And yet, in 2014, it was very explicit that the question was about no excuse absentee voting. And I don't want to steal my colleague, Representative Master Francesco's thunder, because I think she wants to make this point even more clear than I'm about to, which is that this question doesn't even mention no excuse absentee voting. Back in 2014, the question read a little differently. And I'll just read that for comparison's sake. It said, shall the Constitution of the state be amended to remove restrictions concerning absentee ballots and to permit a person to vote without appearing at a polling place on the day of an election? And for me, that is a much more explicit explanation about what is happening here. The question that is before us, for me, doesn't really say that anything's going to change from the current law. It does not mention no excuse absentee voting. And the explanatory text, while is a little more thorough, doesn't really get into it much further as it did in 2014. And the whole point of my comments is that in 2014, this question was put before voters in Connecticut and it failed. So my question, Mr. Chairman, I guess the first thing I would ask is, why aren't we asking the same very explicit and accurate question that we did in 2014? Is it simply because it failed that time?
To you, the good ranking member, I guess I would be cautious to ascribe legislative motives in general, especially considering we're just considering the explanatory text today. But I guess for my part, at least, I will hazard to say that the question that you described and the question that was done in the past is quite confusing in, I think, the majority's opinion to a voter. And this question is shorter, clearer, simpler, and the explanatory text makes clear both the current state of the Constitution and what the question being answered in the affirmative would accomplish. To you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate your desire not to ascribe motive, but I'll be happy to do that. And I'm here to state for the record that it's obvious to me that this new question has been drafted and adopted as part of the constitutional amendment resolutions for the express purpose of making it less clear and less simple. Although I will give the good chairman credit, it is shorter. You and I do agree on that. It is shorter than the previous question, but it is not clearer or simpler or more edifying as far as how the Constitution will be changed, in my opinion. And I'll read the two questions again, just for the sake of people watching. The original question that failed was, forgive me that I have the wrong thing in front of me. There it is. Okay. Shall the Constitution of the state be amended to remove restrictions concerning absentee ballots and to permit a person to vote without appearing at a polling place on the day of election? I don't know that you could do better job of explaining that you're allowing for a process of absentee voting that applies to everyone, which is effectively no excuse absentee voting. The new question doesn't mention that people will not appear personally. It doesn't mention that it will apply to every person. It just basically says, are we going to transfer power to the General Assembly to give them a power which is already implicit in the current law, that the General Assembly does allow voters to vote by absentee ballot? And there's not much more to say, but I believe I'm making a compelling argument that this question is drafted for the express purpose of overcoming the fact that it failed when it was put on the ballot the last time. And I believe that is because many people, when they saw that on the ballot in 2014, immediately had reservations with the notion of people voting not in person. And I think the events of the last several years have only added to that. And this question today, I think, would be even less likely to pass than it would be than it was in 2014. But it's a more honest question, Mr. Chairman, and there's no denying that. I feel, somewhat hamstrung here that we're not in a position to do anything except for potentially reject the explanatory text, which in my opinion is not going to change the outcome of anything. Even if I could magically compel my colleagues in the majority to see it my way, that doesn't change the question. The question is a matter of the resolution being passed by both chambers already. I would just stress for people watching to understand what has transpired, which is that the majority did pass this resolution through the legislature twice, and they did pass it, including this question. And they did pass it knowing that that was the last chance that we had to alter the question. And now it's going to appear on the ballot. And unless there is some concerted effort by the Secretary of State's office, which I don't expect will get involved, or third parties in Connecticut who believe strongly that the impact of no excuse absentee voting is so important that people need to be informed about the importance of this question and what it will imply. Unless that happens, I'm afraid that it's more likely to pass without people truly knowing what can happen as a result. And let me just ask a question or two about what can happen as a result. My understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that if this does go to the ballot as it appears to, and it is passed affirmatively by the voters of the state of Connecticut, what happens next?
To the good ranking member, if the question is approved by the voters by majority this November, then the text that in the current version of the state constitution that designates that only certain reasons may allow for an individual to obtain an absentee ballot will be stricken, and we as the General Assembly will be allowed to legislate who may obtain an absentee ballot and under what conditions, with full latitude, except for the fact that the person will not be able to come vote in person, as well as voting absentee. To you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Constitution will be changed as a result, but before anything really happens that affects the system of voting that we have, the General Assembly will have to meet, debate, and pass legislation modifying the statutory limitations that are on absentee voting. And that's, I'm just summarizing what you just said. Am I correct?
To you, yes.
Okay. That's very good. So does that mean that we would still be able to, if we decided as a General Assembly to include a restriction that says that you can only vote by absentee in the case of sickness, for example?
To you, yes. We would be able to legislate statutorily whatever procedures, restrictions, et cetera, that we as the General Assembly decided were appropriate.
Understood. Understood. Does it mean that we could also expand the ways that people can absentee vote? For example, would that mean that beyond mail-in voting, could that include other forms of voting, online, for example?
To you, I don't believe that there is any constitutional restriction currently on that exact procedure. So I don't believe that that would change, but the answer would be yes, the General Assembly could consider other technological forms of voting. To you.
Can I just ask, since you're a member of the majority, can you let me in on what the plans are? You're the House chairman of this committee concerning elections. You have a lot to say about the policy making that's going to happen in the future. What do you envision we do as a statute when we return and this potentially becomes the new constitutional law of the land?
To you, to the good ranking member, while I certainly appreciate your curiosity, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to speculate about what the General Assembly would do in a future session. To you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can understand your reservations for doing that. And I asked the question simply because, we were in the same position not too long ago where we had another very vague question about early voting. And the number one point that I made repeatedly was that we're not even telling the voters how long the early voting period is. And I asked and asked and asked and asked and offered amendment after amendment to try and lock us into some relatively reasonable and short period. And yet I got crickets, sadly. And ultimately, there was no indication of how many days of early voting there would be until long after the constitutional amendment passed. And then we reconvened as a legislature and we heard varying opinions. We had the Secretary of State offered a time frame. One time frame of 5 days, I believe, when she was a candidate for Secretary of State, and then 7 days when she was elected. And then we heard 10 days potentially the governor was advocating for. And we ultimately ended up with 14 days within 17 days for early voting in the general, and then shorter periods for the early voting. And my opinion is that's been a mistake. I mean, you can look at the numbers over the last several days. I mean, there was such unbelievably little participation in early voting. I think it's a little premature. Maybe we'll see what happens in the general, but it's concerning that there was so little participation, and yet there was so much effort that had to be put forth by local election officials to staff town hall and make sure that there's people on board and expenses that taxpayers will ultimately pay for to have a very, very small number of people participate in the early voting process. So I'm hoping that's more successful in the future. But that leads me to another question. Mr. Chairman, do you envision that anything's going to happen with early voting as a result of the potential of expanded no excuse absentee voting? Will these systems coexist side by side as they do now?
To the good ranking member, I don't believe it would be appropriate for me to speculate as to any future legislation that may happen on these points, but I would say just purely as a legal matter, passing this constitutional amendment would allow the General Assembly to make a number of changes to our voting procedures and systems, and theoretically would allow the General Assembly to harmonize the two systems so that they're more efficient while providing maximum appropriate access for all voters in the state.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And again, I mean, I'm not so much trying to ask you to speculate on the actions of 187 members of the legislature. I'm asking you, as the House chairman of the Elections Committee, what do you think? I mean, I have to assume that you're going to have a lot of say in what happens going forward. And I'm just, looking for some direction and some commitment. I mean, I want to work in a bipartisan fashion as much as possible. But in order for me to do that, Mr. Chairman, I've got to know what you're up to. I would like to know exactly what the plan is for the future. If I think that we're going to turn no excuse absentee voting into a mess by adopting online voting, and there'll be even less credentials required, and the integrity of the vote might be at stake, I'm certainly going to be inclined to go out and oppose it vigorously and make a strong case against it. But if I am hearing that we're going to try and make our voting system simpler, more concise, we're going to combine the concepts of early voting and no excuse absentee voting, so it's simpler for voters. That's one thing I'm hearing a lot, by the way, is that people are confused. People are unbelievably confused about the different ways to vote and what's required of them to do so. And that's a problem created by this General Assembly passing numerous changes to long-standing policy. And that's a frustration I have. I mean, here we are making multiple changes to our state constitution within a relatively few years. Things that have stood for decades are being changed willy-nilly. And we have significant election integrity issues in our state that people are aware of. And I don't believe those are being addressed or even given the proper attention that they deserve, while we are making changes that I'm afraid will open the door to potentially even more integrity issues. The issue with no excuse absentee voting is that it allows people who are not present at the polls to cast a vote. And has been pointed out by people in both parties numerous times, including the Senate president, you never really know who's casting an absentee ballot. So it is always preferable to have in-person voting whenever possible. And I feel like we're moving in the wrong direction by discouraging in-person voting in favor of mail-in voting. And you can make all the arguments in the world about how this is about access. And I'm all for access too. And I'm certainly in favor of maintaining absentee voting for people that need it. But I am more inclined to suggest that we should focus on those individuals by catering to them specifically, but requiring able-bodied people that are not otherwise encumbered to encourage them to vote in person in the way that allows for the most reliable result. Okay, so I think I've said most of my piece. I could go on for quite some time talking about the problems with elections in the state, but I know this is not the place or time for it. I will just leave with ending with a comment that I made in the middle, which is that I am not satisfied that the question that is going to be placed on the ballot is a good enough question, for lack of a better term, for the voters. I don't think it is clearer or simpler, and I'm in disagreement with the chairman on that. The question that was asked in 2014 was very clear, and it failed as a result. And I believe that the majority purposely changed the question in an effort to try and pass the same thing, effectively pulling the wool over the eyes of voters about what's actually happening by changing this question in an attempt to get it to pass. And I hope that the news media reports my comments accurately because I think that's the truth. Those are my comments for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Is there further discussion from the committee? Representative Mastrofrancesco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think Senator Sampson probably covered a lot of what I wanted to touch base on, but I do have some further questions and actually just some comments. And I know we're not here today to talk about the ballot question, but I do, just as comments, want to mention a few things. When we voted in the when the resolution was passed in the General Assembly, it was clearly to make a constitutional amendment to allow for no excuse absentee voting. And I think there is a lot of confusion with voters when they go to vote on this particular question, exactly what the ballot question has. It doesn't specify anything in there about no excuse absentee voting. And I heard this with the early voting. People went out and voted for it. They felt, yeah, they wanted to vote early, but they didn't realize that it would be maybe 3 days, 7 days, 14 days, causing a lot of frustration with the voters and with the towns, because the question at that time was not very clear, because people have to exactly know exactly what they're voting for. This particular bill that that was passed in the legislature clearly said no excuse absentee voting. But there's nowhere in the ballot question or even in the explanatory text that talks about no excuse. Currently, right now, no excuse absentee voting. You request the ballot. You would request it. There's absolutely nothing in here that talks about someone having to request it. So just for clarification on that, Mr. Chairman, should this explanatory text pass, would someone still have to request a ballot?
To you, to the House Ranking Member, under our current law, yes.
Thank you. So under current law that's in place right now, but should this question on the ballot pass, would that be changed? Would someone still have to request a ballot?
Yes, as long as statutory changes were not made, yes, they would still have to request an absentee ballot to you.
Okay. So actually, that kind of brings me to my next question. Should this pass, can the legislature, now they have the authority to change that, can that be changed where someone does not have to necessarily request a ballot?
To the good ranking member, if the constitutional amendment were to be passed, there would be no constitutional provision preventing the General Assembly from making such a change to you. Okay,
so I'm just trying to understand, you're back and forth with Senator Sampson, and this goes to the explanatory text, and he was talking about the authority of the legislature should this pass. I believe he asked a question, for example, for sickness, let's say, we could still keep that into language, the statutorily, correct? That someone would have to have sickness to vote by absentee ballot based on what I'm reading here. Is that correct?
To the good ranking member, yes.
Okay, so if that is correct, that the legislature would still have the authority, if I'm understanding you correctly, to put into statute that someone would have to maybe say that they were sick, ill, out of town, we can still do that statutorily, correct?
To you, yes.
Correct. Okay, so if that is the case, I guess my next question is, the resolution that was passed in the legislature was a resolution approving a state constitutional amendment to allow no excuse absentee voting. So that a power given to the legislature, based on what you're telling me, contradicts what we voted on for the resolution. Because you're telling somebody that you can request an absentee ballot, but you have to have a sickness or for whatever reason it is, based on what you just told me in your conversation with Senator Sampson. And that contradicts what we voted on in the session. Is that correct?
To you, I would respectfully disagree. That was the title of the resolution, but the substance of the resolution does not mandate that no excuse absentee voting, which is a term of art for every eligible voter being able to vote absentee if they so wish. It does not mandate that be the law. I think the title even indicates that no excuse absentee voting would be allowed, which means that we would be able to legislate on it in order to make it be allowed. But the substance of the resolution and the question are very clear that the change to the Constitution that is being made is that the Constitution will be changed so that the General Assembly shall have the authority to legislate on this question rather than being constricted as it is by the current constitutional language. To you.
Thank you. And I think that's where the confusion is. And this is my very, very much a frustration for me, is confusing the voter, right? I think it's a disservice to them. They should clearly know exactly what they're voting for. So this resolution that was passed in the legislature clearly said no excuse absentee voting. And let's be honest, people don't really read the details of the bill. And I know we mentioned this frustration many times in session where the title doesn't match the context of the bill. And I think especially when we're doing something to change our Constitution, the title of this resolution that was passed should have been very, very clear. Now, I understand that today we are not here talking about what was passed in there, but I think it goes to the point of the explanatory text. And the question, as Senator Sampson said, on the ballot in 2014, technically that information that is in there could have been in this explanatory text. There could have been some reference to that language or something similar in there so people clearly know what they're voting for. Should this pass, and again, it's given the legislature the authority to pass laws regarding how people can vote by absentee ballot, can the legislature legislate or pass something in statute that allows for all mail-in voting, and maybe a ballot is just mailed to everybody automatically? Does this passage of this amendment give the legislature the authority to pass something like that through you?
To you, if this constitutional amendment were passed, there would be nothing in the Constitution preventing the legislature from making such a change. And so the answer to your question is yes. I will just caution everyone. I mean, we have been discussing extensively the background and some of the policy, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that in a general sense, but it would, I think, behoove us to try to direct our questions and answers, especially to the text of the explanatory text that we are considering today, because our decision today is confined to approving or disapproving that text. To you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And listen, I completely understand that, but the explanatory text, what we're talking about today, is very important that the voters understand what this actually does. So I think it is appropriate for us to talk about the possibilities of what the legislature can do should this amendment pass. I think it's absolutely very appropriate. It goes to the point of it, and it clearly says in here the state that therefore it would expand the state's legislature's authority to pass laws regarding voting by qualified voters who will not appear at their polling place on election day. So I think it's very much appropriate to talk about the possibilities of, look, this is what could happen if this passes. I think people should know that. That possibly could happen. Anybody can get a ballot in the mail. According to you, we can still put restrictions on mandate excuses for how people vote by absentee ballot. It could say that the legislature can pass something that says that they don't need to request a ballot. So I think these absolutely go to the heart of what is the content of this explanatory text. So I would respectfully disagree with the good chairman on that. I don't think it goes off topic here by any means. And I believe, let me just ask you one more question on this, if I may. I have so many questions I can ask, and I won't belabor because maybe my other colleagues have other questions. But the discussion came up with Senator Sampson about where this text would be displayed, the explanatory text would be displayed. And you mentioned that it would go to the towns and they would put up a poster, so forth in the polling place. So for people that are voting by absentee ballot, when they get that ballot, is there any explanatory text explanation in that envelope for them to read? You didn't mention anything in there when you were reading the requirements for that. Can you clarify that for me, Mr. Chairman, through you?
To the good ranking member, my understanding to the answer to the question is yes, that they would receive the explanatory text along with their absentee ballot.
Okay, thank you. And is that in like a separate sheet, a separate piece of paper that goes into the ballot? Or is it clearly the explanatory text cannot be on the ballot? Is that correct? So I'm assuming it would have to be in a separate document. Is that correct?
To you, that's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And just one more on that subject. Is that required to be put in the explanatory text to be put in with the absentee ballots? Because I believe when you read that language to Senator Sampson, I didn't see anything in there that it said it's required to be put in the absentee ballot. Can you clarify that for me? It's not if it's a requirement, and is there a language in there that specifically says that explanatory text must be in the ballot?
To you, I do not see in the the relevant statutory section a absolute mandate that it be included in every absentee ballot set. But it is my understanding that that is the procedure, and I'm not sure if there's a regulation mandating it, but I don't see it in the in Connecticut General Statute Section 2-30A.
Okay, thank you. So I'm assuming that it is possible that the individual towns that are sending out their absentee ballots can send that out because it's not in law required without an explanatory text. Is that possible for you?
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. It is, I was looking at the wrong statutory section. There is a statutory section mandating that it be included in absentee ballot sets, and it is Connecticut General Statutes 9-140 subsection D. Let me just, and I will read that for the record. All right, so subsection D of that section says, quote, an absentee voting set shall consist of an absentee ballot, inner and outer envelopes for its return, instructions for its use, and if applicable, explanatory text concerning the ballot questions as provided for in sections 2-30A and 9-369B no other material shall be included with an absentee voting set issued to an applicant except as provided in several sections, or where necessary to correct an error or omission as provided in another section. So the separate statutory section 9-140 does mandate that this explanatory text be included in every absentee voting set. So every absentee voter will be provided with the explanatory text to you.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I was very much concerned that ballots may go out without any explanatory text. I will just wrap up really. I mean, I could spend hours here talking about this subject, but I will just end with saying a few words that I think the language is very, very vague in the explanatory text. And I think it's really, really important that people understand what they're voting for. If anything, honestly, I would like to see explanatory text actually be put on the ballot, because how many people are going to go in on voting on election day and see a poster and actually read it? Senator Sampson is absolutely correct. The question that's on there already implies current law. And it's making the voters now doing up an extra step. They have to figure out what that is. Well, of course, a voter is going to go out there and say people should vote by absentee. Everybody agrees with that. There's a lot of reasons why people should vote by absentee. But I think people need to understand the possibilities. When we pass, there's a lot of unintended consequences that we've seen passed in a lot of other bills that we passed in the legislature. And people don't really understand, or maybe they don't think that, oh, this is what happened. This was passed, and these are the possibilities that could happen, and these are the ramifications for it. And I think that has to be very, very clear. And I don't think in the explanatory text that is very, very clear at all. As a matter of fact, there's nothing in here that says no excuse absentee voting, which is, like I said, I know you disagree. The title of the bill does not necessarily mean what's in the content. I would agree. If we've seen that with many bills in there, but we're talking about changing the Constitution. And the people that are voting for this need to be very clear and understand what they're voting for. As I've mentioned with early voting, I'm certain that if the question on the ballot gave people options of 7 days, 14 days, 3 days, 10 days, they may have more to say about it. The other thing that I'm really, really concerned about here is when they talk about, and I don't mean to be facetious by and throw in a dig, but when they passed early voting, our party, our ranking members on this committee were given no input from the beginning on any legislation and any policy. We were not involved in the process, which is very, very concerning. We have always said that anything when it comes to elections should always be bipartisan 100%. That did not happen with early voting, where we asked for changes, certainly towards the end, but that was after the bill was drafted. The public hearing had already passed. We were not involved in the process from the beginning. And I certainly hope something like this, if this passes, that we are involved in the process from day one, because anything that has to do with elections, it should be bipartisan 100%. I will leave it at that. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the dialogue back and forth. I appreciate it. And my other members may have some other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Mastrofrancesco. Is there further discussion from the committee? Further discussion from the committee? Seeing none, I would just, oh, excuse me, Representative Carpino, I do see you've raised your hand and you are recognized.
Thank you, sir. I was looking for the new raise your hand button, so my apologies for the delay. I just have a question I'm hoping that you can answer for me. In the event that the voters so choose to vote in the affirmative in the majority this November, and the General Assembly and the good members who have the ability to return and be sworn in January move forward, the state of Connecticut has what I suspect will amount to no excuse absentee balloting. Is it the intention of the GAE committee then to remove the obligation on the local town officials for early in-person voting? As we've known, at least anecdotally to me, the number of folks who have chosen that option perhaps is not, I adequately represented by the cost to our local municipalities. If you could opine on that, sir.
To Madam Representative, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to speculate about what a future General Assembly, which may have different members and this committee may have different members, may do. But if the constitutional amendment were to pass, yes, those issues could be addressed as a legal matter by the General Assembly. To you.
Thank you for that. And I will actually take it a step further and put the challenge out there to the members who are fortunate enough to take that oath in January, that although a lofty goal, our municipalities are seeing a very low turnout. And if this option is available to our eligible voters to exercise in the future, that we really need to examine what is best for our communities and our voters, and perhaps the early in-person voting should be re-examined. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative. Is there further discussion from the committee? Is there further discussion from the committee? Seeing none, I will just make one final comment. Certainly appreciate the remarks of all the good members of the committee. I did just want to, for the record, make one clarification. The 2014 constitutional amendment resolution was slightly different in the substance. It also included early voting in addition to no excuse absentee voting. So, I answered the question incompletely, I think, in terms of the reasons for the difference. I certainly wouldn't want to get into the intentions of any legislator or any drafter or anything like that. So I would maintain that. But one additional thing I would have added, if I thought of it at the time, is that additional point. So seeing no further discussion, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Chair, may I have a moment, please?
Yes. And while we're waiting, I will just note for the record that the votes will be the votes will be held open until 5 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While we're waiting, just a quick question. You had mentioned the 2014 ballot question had to do with early voting as well. Did you say that?
Yes.
Because that wasn't the question on the
Representative,
ballot, so I was just confused.
to you, I'm looking at it now. It would have changed two sections of the Constitution, Section 7 of Article 6 of the Constitution, which this constitutional amendment, which we're about to vote on the explanatory text for, would have changed. And then also Section 4 of Article 4 of the Constitution, which this amendment does not change. That was
Thank you.
in the election, in the early voting resolution. To you.
Thank you. That was in the explanatory text, not the question that was on the ballot. It must have been, because the question on the ballot clearly says nothing about early voting, which is a point that I'm making, is that people can easily get confused. So I'm
not disputing your argument. I'm just saying that was in the substance of the amendment.
Gotcha.
Not the question, I believe, was read properly by you and by Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can proceed with your voting now, I guess. I don't have any further questions.
Whenever Madam Clerk, you're ready.
I am ready. Thank you for your patience. Senator Flexer.
Senator Flexer votes yes.
Blumenthal.
Representative Blumenthal votes yes.
Slack.
Senator Slapp votes yes.
Morin-Bello.
Representative Morin-Bello votes yes.
Sampson.
Sampson is no.
One more time, Senator, please.
Senator Sampson votes no.
Thank you. Master Francesco.
Representative Mastro Francesco votes no.
Burger Gervalo. Bronco.
No.
Carpino.
No.
Haddad.
Representative Haddad votes yes.
Hoxa.
Rep. Hoxa votes no.
Hana.
Representative Khanna votes yes.
Labriola.
Representative Labriola votes no.
Marks. McCarthy Vehy,
Representative McCarthy Vehy votes yes.
McCrory, Parker,
Representative Parker votes yes.
Rosario, Santiago. All set, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Again, the votes on this item will be held open until 5 p.m. And with that, this committee is in recess.
Hi, Representative Rosario. How would you like to vote today?
Representative Rosario would like to vote in the affirmative.
Okay, you're all set, Representative.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Representative.
Hi, Valentina.
Hi, how would you like to vote today?
Santiago votes yes.
Okay, you're all set, Representative.
Thank you. Have a good
Welcome.
weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Senator. Senator Marks? Senator Marks, let me know when you're ready to vote, please. There you go. I can't hear you, Senator. Senator Marks, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, Valentina.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Senator. How would you like to vote today?
Okay, I just had to go outside. Okay. I would like to vote yes.
Okay. And you're all
Thank
set,
you.
Senator?
I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.